On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World Season 2. A magazine partner for this series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. Our first session today is Dystopian Realities, Writing Rural Distress. Namita Waikar and periphery of social and media consciousness and a very little media attention, even at the moment of this present crisis. In conversation with journalist Namita Bhandare, novelist Namita Waikar, and Neelima Kota, whose narratives revolve around rural themes, examine the causes and consequences of this indifference and the issues that need to be consistently center staged to address this imbalance. The session seeks to spotlight the crucial gaps in public perception and understanding, as well as in the real-time coverage being given to these devastating issues. Namita Waikar is a writer and translator and author of the novel The Long March. She is the managing editor of People's Archive of Rural India, Pari, and writes on gender, women, society, and culture with a focus on rural life. Kota Neelima is an author, political scientist, and former journalist, and writes on poverty, gender, electoral reforms, and democratic it. She has authored 7 books ranging from poverty to spirituality. Her recent book, Widows of Vidarbha, Making of Shadows, is a longitudinal study of farmer souls. 2 of her books have been optioned for a web series, and 1 has been optioned for a movie. Namita Bhandare is an award-winning journalist with over 30 years of reporting experience for various publications, including magazines like The Sunday and India Today, and the daily The Hindustan Times. She at present is an independent journalist who writes a fortnightly column on gender for the Hindustan Times and also writes for Mint, India Spend, and Foreign Policy. Remember, all our sessions that have been broadcast till now are available on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest GLF. Please do remember to ask questions and comment by typing it into the comment section below. And Namita Bhandare,
Thank you, Sanjoy. I'm delighted to be here with old friends. These are unprecedented times, and there's a certain comfort in being here back at JLF, along with both Kota Neelima and Namita Waikar, with whom I've had wonderful sessions in the past in Jaipur. And inshallah, we will be back in Jaipur shortly or soon again. When we look at rural India, 65% of our population lives in rural India. And yet a recent study found unprecedented times. A recent study found that it's only rural India makes up only 2% of stories in our national leading newspapers. When we do cover rural India, we look at stories that fall into the categories of either natural disaster, calamity, accident, crime, violence, or then into the bucket of hunger, malnutrition, and farmer suicide. I'm not saying that these are not important issues. These are crucial, critical issues. But perhaps these are not the only stories coming out of rural India. There is a lot more, and perhaps we don't get to hear those stories. So this topic got me thinking about what are the stories that we are missing? How do we cover rural India? Who tells these stories? And how do we pick and choose which stories to tell? Namita, let's get right into it. I want to start by asking you, since you're the managing editor of Pari, are you satisfied with the way rural India has been covered in the mainstream press? What was the need to have Pari as a standalone website?
Yeah, thank you, Namita. Thank you all for having me here. When I finished writing my novel, The Long March, which in essence and central to it has a group of farmers marching into cities to put their demands to the governments there. Just a couple of months before that, there was an actual march from Nasik to Mumbai. About 40,000 farmers came into the city, and a month after the book was published, there was another march which where farmers came to New Delhi from all over India.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how is it when the first march happened from Nasik to Mumbai, there was no coverage at all? Why was there no coverage? I mean, there was no interest. It's only when the people of Mumbai got involved, when they started going to them and, noticing that their feet were injured and they were running out of food and shelter and other things. That's when the actual people in the city got involved, that's when the media also got more interested and they started covering those stories.
But in a sense, we covered that story because rural India came into urban India.
Correct.
So it wasn't the other way around, right?
Yeah, it came into urban India. And so this is the point. I mean, there is a huge apathy towards something which doesn't affect you directly. And until it's a problem for you, you don't give it your focus.
Correct.
And these are people who put in their effort and their sweat and blood into getting the food on our table. And we look at them only when they come and line up into our streets, into our grounds, into our playgrounds. And
correct.
This apathy is, I think, the root cause. And there's a lack of empathy among us for anything that doesn't concern us directly. And I think the community feeling of being involved with the community, with the others who are part of your country. And also, of course, where media is concerned, it is always about the commercial value. The farmers who come in, the farmers who are working in rural India, they are not the target audience of most of the mainstream media. In fact, as you rightly said, 2% coverage in Indian newspapers on rural India. The coverage on the national newspapers front pages is even less. It's just some
right, unless there is a Hathras, or unless there is a a disaster like that. Kota, can I come to Kota? I'd like to come to Kota here about our coverage, because Hathras is so recent and because it has just happened. Kota, how do you assess our meaning mainstream media's coverage of the horrific crime at Hathras?
Thank you for the question. Wonderful question, Namita. First of all, delighted to be back here at Jaipur Literature Festival. You are absolutely right. This brings a lot of hope and a sense of normalcy. And I'd like to compliment Sanjay, William, and of course, Namita Gokhleji for this online version of it. This is brilliant. Now, here we have to actually, after 15 years of trying to write and after several books on rural India, there's one thing which I have discovered. It's very extremely difficult to write about rural India, but it's also equally difficult to read about it. So when there is a Hathras happening, or when something which is very specific in a particular framework which is happening, which is not mainstream, which is quote unquote periphery. I have a problem with that word, but I'm just using it in a symbolic, illustrative manner. But when something which is happening on the periphery, how do you mainstream it? This has not happened in India. And this is despite our constitution, which specifically is all about mainstreaming these issues. So when you talk about gender, when you talk about Dalits, when you talk about violence or law and order or safety of women, all these issues are covered in our essentially the imagining of India. That's where they have been mainstreamed, but they have not been mainstreamed in our politics, in our media, in our
Correct. But let's talk about Hathras. You come to that issue. We'll talk about the other peripherals as well. But because Hathras is so immediate, and just in case anyone doesn't know what happened at Hathras, this is where a 19-year-old Dalit girl was raped allegedly by 4 upper caste Thakur men. And then, of course, there was I'm sad, sorry to use this word, a routine rape, a routine gang rape, because this has become routine in India now. But what followed was the administration and the police apathy and insensitivity and human rights violation, really, where she was cremated at midnight without the consent of her family. So
Right.
can you talk about that?
Yes, I think there was the entire pushback which we saw was from the media. You have to give it to them, although there are, exception to that, because we have done the research while Hathras was happening, what was being covered on TV.
Yeah.
And we discovered they were still talking about SSR, they were still talking about Ria, and they were still, people were of course pulling out Deepika Padukone's, WhatsApp messages. But then what I'm trying to say is there was a section of media which went into this particular case and brought back the stories, and they were takers for this. Now that's what my point is, that the viewers were looking at these stories of Hathras, they were sensitive, they were sensitized, and the most important part was it was the public perception which pushed the Hathras case to move forward. If it had not been done by the media, then how would we have even known what was happening next to the family, or even to the kind of evidence which we now know is not being presented in the court, or how it is being manipulated. So my point simply, Namita, is this, that if we provide a way of writing about rural India, about peripheral issues, this India responds to it.
Correct. But Namita, I want to actually ask you, yes, it is true that media brought the Hathras. In fact, that midnight cremation was a story that was broken by a journalist. And that is the tipping point in this particular case. Namita, but there was a little bit of a Peoply Live angle in it. And I think Khabar Leheria, which I follow along with your website, Pari, of course, had a story about the violence inflicted by the media on this family, because you had literally and this is what we didn't see, these are the stories we don't see, right? So you had obi vans and you had mics being thrust into the faces of this family that has just suffered such a grievous tragic loss, is trying to come to terms with a hostile administration. They've just 15 Dalit families in that village of 300 Thakur families. And you just look at the violence of the media, really. So again, Namita, I want to ask you this question: who tells these stories?
Yeah.
You come in this kind of helicopter journalism. You just dash in, shove your mic in, and then you go out, and the story is forgotten. You move on to the next story, don't you?
Yeah, right. Thank you. I mean, that's a very apt question right now. The thing is, this helicopter journalism, it's focused on events and disasters, as you pointed out. But if you're following the processes as we do in the People's Archive of Rural India, we talk about the hardships and the violence inflicted on the Dalits. We talk about the issues of women farmers, Adivasis, Dalits, and the issues of farmers as well as the migrant laborers. Now, for this, if you look at our website, the Pari website, you will find stories that cover their lives, that tell us how their day-to-day lives are going on, how much do they struggle. There's a recent story about a man who is trying to sell, raddi, the scrap collectors, and he makes just 2 to 4 rupees, in a day. Imagine, going through a lot of effort to do that. There's a story of, there are stories of women's reproductive health series where we have also spoken about the violence that is inflicted on women during this COVID pandemic. These are stories which are not covered by the mainstream media, and these are stories which happen every day, every day, everywhere in our villages, and they don't get the attention unless something violent and even in the Hathras case, it became more prominent only after they cremated and burnt that evidence. So I think those are the stories, and there are inspiring stories. I mean, when Rohit Vemula was an inspiring story, Payal Tadvi was an inspiring story, until the society and the institutions, the people running those institutions, worked against them. Otherwise, they were stars. They were people who struggled against all odds and came forward, and their stories are the kind of stories we put in. Now, a simple story like a 20-year-old girl in Bhuj, which is a rural town in Kutch in Gujarat. She is just 8th standard pass, and then she learns to drive an auto rickshaw, and she goes on the streets in this auto rickshaw, and the women on the streets cheer her up. They give her a thumbs up. Now, she is from a Dalit family. Her father and mother are illiterate, but they want all their children to learn. Now, these are also inspiring stories. Now, if we follow all these kind of stories where you show the happiness that they get by aspiring to do better in their lives, and also the hardships and the violence that they have to fight against when society, and especially upper caste and upper class people, work against them, whether it's in rural India or in urban cities.
Correct.
Right? So these are
Correct.
the kind of stories that if mainstream media were to cover them, believe me, they'll get more people watching them
Absolutely.
and reading them.
I agree with you. Kota, it strikes me as a little ironic that here we are talking about rural agrarian distress and telling the rural story, and who tells the story, whose perspective, and how do we tell the story. And yet here we are. I'm sitting in Delhi, Namita is in Pune, and you're also in Delhi because you were in Supreme Court earlier this morning.
Yes.
I know. Sanjoy is in Delhi. So, again we come back to this question: who is telling the story? What is our legitimacy? So when you wrote about the widows of Vidarbha, I mean, how did you broach it?
Yeah.
You know
It's a great question. So what I did was to, just put it very briefly because we are short on time, and I know we have a lot of terrain to cover. What I did was to write the book and write the text, then translate it back into Marathi and read it out to the women themselves. So it was it was difficult because this added like 2 or 3 layers further to my research, which was already 4 year long. And also it meant that the women had to give me more time, which was what bothered me, because they were taking time out of their work and they were giving me. But I did it for a very, very simple reason. I wanted to discover my own bias. What you're saying about legitimacy is so right, because just because I am on the field, I am able to talk to them, I do not think that qualifies me automatically as a person who can understand or who is the right person to tell the story. I do not believe that. I think that first of all, they have to approve the fact that I am the teller of their story. So for that reason, I read the story out to them, and yes, there were biases which I had assumed. Basically, it was a sense of understanding the general picture of rural India instead of getting into the finer detail. So when one gets into the texture of the rural Indian life, one realizes that there is an impact of almost everything, which from policy to people, and that doesn't get reflected in this the overview journalism which happens, overview books which happen. So when I read them out and they corrected those texts, these women who very politely corrected, no, we did not mean this assumption is wrong, this conclusion. So then I mean, that was the best part of my research, I think, where as you correctly said, I understood who are you when you are telling the story. You cannot be a Delhi based person or a urban, or even I cannot be just an outsider. I have to be an insider, and that's the kind of divide which we have to bridge. I mean, if at all it shows anything, it's this huge gap, despite all the let's say influx of researchers, writers, people who do a lot of work on rural India with real heart. Even then, we have not been able to kind of bridge that gap, which I think there are no words to it. It's more than perception. It's a very deep gap, which actually merges us, immerses us in their lives, so that we can actually talk about them with the kind of authenticity which they expect from us. Now,
Correct.
that's the real problem, isn't it? I mean, when we are talking about inspiring stories, Namita, the thing is that why doesn't media's inspiring stories actually inspire the rural India? Because we are still looking at the superficial level. We are still looking at the first level, second level, third level.
Give me an example. Give me an example.
Empowerment. I was about to say that empowerment, the idea of women's empowerment, or the idea of the feminist framework, it doesn't fit into the rural scenario. And Namita will agree with me that when you are looking at a rural woman's empowerment, it's totally a different construct, and that has to be celebrated in a different way. You cannot, therefore, when you are talking about, let's say, a woman getting skilled, this is an example which is very close to my heart because I'm following their family very closely for several years. A girl wants to be trained as an electrician, but there is no course as an electrician. There's only a course as a beautician, because that's what the government thinks of women should become, beauticians. So there's no chance of her becoming an agricultural scientist or an electrician. So
correct. But Kota, that is a problem for rural and urban. That is a problem with the skilling mission, that it's highly gendered, isn't it?
No. What I'm saying is, even if you write great, inspiring stories that, okay, 10 people have become beauticians, you're not going to really make any difference in their life, and they know it.
Correct. So let's bring Namita in. Namita, how would you respond to this? That we feel that we've got this great sisterhood that is happening, but it is largely urban. I mean, to give you an example, the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement actually only covered women in the formal sector, which is about 5% of employed women, and it left out rural women. And we almost never talk of a sisterhood in rural India. We almost never talk of reaching out to women and to making bridges. So we will have connections and links with New York or with the Washington March, but we will not have connections and links in Bid, right? How do we do that? How do we bridge this gap?
Yeah, I think the best way to bridge this gap is by connecting with the women in rural India and joining them into the stories that we do. And taking off on the some of the things that Kota Neelima also suggested about feminism and women's groups in rural India. So there is this collection of songs, the grind mill songs that I work on. And the women who cannot read or write, they have passed down these songs over generations, composed by these women while they are working in the corner of the house, grinding grains to flour. But the stories that they tell through those songs, stories of harassment by men, and they say, you man, you stupid man, you're like the dirt outside my door, after a heavy rainfall. And how many other terms can I tell you, how worthless you are to me. Now, this kind of language from the women who work in their homes in the village, they don't have a platform like Me Too. Okay, what they are singing is within their private zone, their private space where they are away from the men in their society. But do we bring out those stories? Yes, to some extent we do. In Pari, we definitely do. And when I showed some of these songs that we published and the stories that we published about them to these women, the videos that were put up on YouTube, and the women were happy. One of them called me and she said that, oh, I've seen these songs and you have made us world famous, by putting us on YouTube. So it's not impossible to put them. And when the first of these stories were published, there were television channels who went to Bid. One of the women was from Bid district, and they went to Bid to interview her, and they put her up on some of the Marathi news channels. And all of them called me back and said that, oh, this happened after your story was published.
So that does put actually an enormous pressure on you to tell the stories that mainstream media might or might not pick up and may blow up into national stories. Is that the template, basically?
That's true. But then I think it also depends on the kind of story that we want to read and what we tell the television channels or the newspapers about the kind of stories we want to read. I mean, are we involved with these channels to tell them that this is not what we want and this is what we want, and why don't you do these kind of stories? Now, there are a lot of independent channels, YouTube channels and websites which are coming up. A few of them are led by women, and I know who I'm talking about. One of these media websites is also Article 14, of which Namita, you are a part of.
Yes, I am.
And there's Anubha Bhosle, there's Faye D'Souza, and there are so many others who are running these channels, and they are bringing people and giving their voices. And about the voices of, let's say, Dalits or minorities, there's something called Pass the Mic, which Faye has recently started, and she's including them in these discussions. I want to know whether in future on these discussions on the JLF platform, whether we will have someone like one of those three women, wonderful women who were there with Faye the other day, like the Miss
Cynthia Kiruba Munuswamy.
Cynthia
Yeah.
Stephens, Kuruba
Yes.
Munuswamy, and there was one more. I think her surname was Malhari. I can't recollect the first name right now.
I think what we need to do is we need to talk to Sanjoy after this show,
we need
and
to get
I'm
those
sure he's
women.
aware, and
Yeah.
because these are very articulate, very
Right.
sophisticated
And they have
voices.
so many stories to tell, and they should be
Absolutely.
talking to us about everything, not only about the conflicts and the violence in their lives.
Right. So, Kota, because you've got a case, a very high profile media case in the Supreme Court right now with Sudarshan TV's Bindas Bowl program. So, do you think that there is the scope to influence? Viewers want SSR, right? Television channels do it because that's what they assume that readers want. So, really a two-part question. Number one is, what do readers want? Do readers actually want this kind of Bollywood inane shouting match on TV night after night? Or are they looking for an alternative story? And the second part to my question is that how do we use technology to leverage this to our advantage?
No, of course, I'll not comment on the case because it's like going on and I don't want to. But this is what I'm saying is independent of what is happening in the court. And to answer your first question, yes, I think viewers are looking for the alternative story. The proof is, I also began by thinking that maybe we'll have to really convince a very reluctant Indian reader to start reading about rural India or these issues which are, and maybe they are more interested in something like SSR. But in my experience, that's what I was saying, after 15 years of doing this, my stories which are about farmer suicide families, they have been told in a narrative, right? They are being made into commercial web series. So there are takers for this, and this is a story of a young man who is the son of a very poor farmer and the kind of inheritance he has. This is Shoes of the Dead. And that thing is being made into a movie. So I have, in that sense, a great faith in the Indian viewer. But having said that, yes, there has to be this. This is the second part of what you have said, that there has to be a feedback mechanism. We have to also see that viewers do not get to choose what they see on TV. They get to choose the kind of books they read. Therefore, people like me who write on these issues, we see our books moving forward. But and also these stories moving forward, the stories of farmers, why they commit suicide, what happens when policies are not matching, the ground realities. These are the stories which are now turning into actual series. So that's happening when the viewers have a choice between one book and the other, and a book becomes bestseller. But that doesn't happen on television debates, right? We do not get to choose that we don't want to see SSR or we don't want to see a media trial. So where is the choice with a TV viewer to say that, okay, I want to know what is happening, let's say, in a mining area, what is happening to the tribals? What is happening to their rights? What is happening to their land? Do we get to even say this? So there has to be technology. That's the last part of your question, which is how do we use technology? So the best way to use technology right now, and I wish somebody, I wish I had the knowledge to do this, but to have a feedback mechanism where viewers can tell online when a channel is running its debate, let's have a voting from the viewers saying that, is this a relevant topic or not? What are the topics you want to listen to? Is this, for instance, maybe they'll say that 90% say that we want to watch women issues or maybe something else, but at least we will have a feedback mechanism. Right now, it's just one way.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I think you're treading on very dangerous ground over there.
As
Or
usual.
maybe I'm just an old-fashioned journalist where we did stories that we thought were in the public interest to know. We didn't really do a poll amongst our readers. Because if you did a poll amongst the readers, we weren't sure what result we'd get. So we say, I think this is in the public interest. So Namita, I mean, how important is viewer feedback when you do your stories? Are you looking at your audience? Are you conscious about how many hits or views or whatever it is that you are getting? Or are you telling the stories that you decide are important stories to tell? You use your journalistic judgment. I'm not saying you're
Yeah.
playing God, but you're
Yeah.
using your journalistic judgment and experience to say, well, I think this is a great story. I mean, this woman who's driving an auto rickshaw, I think this is a story that people would like to watch.
Right. Yeah. So I think at Pari, what we do is, first of all, we tell stories of, the everyday lives of everyday people. So whatever happens in their lives is important because we want to know how they uh, run their lives, what is the economics of their profession, what is their livelihood. And when we put it up on our website and on social media, we found that people are really interested, and especially lately the number of people who are interested and the age group is between 18 to 24. So young people, the young crowd on Instagram, they are very much interested in these stories. And especially during the COVID-19, the lockdown and this pandemic that's going on, we've covered over 130 stories. And when they were put up on Instagram and on Twitter and on social media, Facebook, etc., people came forward and they wanted to help the people in the stories.
Yes.
So there is real empathy. And other than this kind of feedback, other than the feedback that people keep writing to us that these are good stories and we want to help those people, we have recently also launched the Pari education website, okay, where our Pari education team, they interact with schools and colleges and the students there who do projects that are based on rural India. So they begin at a small space, where they speak to the watchman in their building. These are urban students, who have, many of them have very extreme right-wing views as to, why do people have to work on the farms? They can just come to the cities and get a job. They are totally cut off from the realities. So when they hear the stories, when they read the stories on Pari, and when they are told about it, that's when it strikes them that, oh my God, I mean, this is true. And some of them, even students from middle school, the reactions they give are so stark and so innocent that, oh my God, I didn't know that the farmer worked so much and got only so little, because they have an understanding of how much they spend
Yeah.
on, say, a t-shirt.
Well,
So,
correct. And a case in point, and
yeah,
maybe Kota also wants to weigh in on this, a case
yeah,
in point would be the farmer's bill. So after reading a ton of newspapers and I don't know how many column inches, I actually was no wiser. I wasn't, because it had all, the coverage was about the political protest, who's saying what. The edit pages were being written by ministers and both from the opposition and from the ruling party. And I was none the wiser for all my reading. I actually still don't have a handle on it. So Kota, do you want to come into, just simplifying complicated policy, legislation stories? I mean, is there a need to do that?
Yes, I think, and another thing is, this is something which I constantly feel. There is there's an infantilization of the farmer. We think that
Mhm.
he's too simple-minded, that he will not understand. Who thinks like this? Why is the farmer not part of these decision-making bodies? And this is the reason. कि उनको क्या पता होगा? I mean, excuse me, they understand exactly how every economic aspect of agriculture works. This is one of the reasons why farmer suicides do not stop in this country, because nobody asks the widow who is the first witness of the farmer suicide. Why does the farmer suicide happen? The government thinks mahila ko kya malum hoga. Similarly, Dalits ko kya malum hoga. This overlord attitude of the government is the reason behind the farm bill crisis, to be very honest. This should have been discussed carefully with the farmers. When you are making sure that MSP is going to be redundant, you should make provisions so that farmers do not lose. But here there are clear pathways in which we can see that the corporates are going to gain, not the farmers. They're not even going to get MSP. And if there is an oral assurance from none less than the government and the prime minister on this. What is an oral assurance? when you have to withdraw MSP, you are taking out an order. But when you have to impose it, there is an oral assurance. So I think that is where the crux of the thing. There is a sense that, you know, the rural India needs the government, the center, the periphery needs the center to, you know, decide their fate.
My bap type
My
attitude,
bap.
है ना, my
You know,
bap.
so that my bap thing is not, you see, that's what we saw on the roads, right? People are now responding to that because they know they know better than this, and
Yeah.
this has to change. Yeah.
So it's actually quite uncanny. I think we are now getting into audience question because I'm being reminded of the time, and it's really uncanny or canny that my first question really is coming from Roshni Arora, who asks, one of the major demands being put up by some farmer bodies is making MSP a legal right. So how will this work in a practical sense, and how will it affect the agricultural field? Namita, do you want to take that since Kota has been talking about the farmer bill? I'd like you to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I think the essence here is that the farmers are at a disadvantage when you're giving these, opening up the field to the corporates and corporatizing agriculture, so to speak. You have opened up the field for big business to go into contracts with farmers, but there is no compulsion to have a written contract. There is no redressal mechanism. So you might say that the farmer can sell it to the place where he gets the highest price, but he doesn't really have a choice. Most of these farmers are waiting to sell their produce at the gate of the farm, and how long are they going to wait? And corporates are not going to give them a higher price. They are going to bring the prices lower. And with the Essential Commodities Act, the corporates are also free to hoard grains and hoard foodstuffs. So I think having a balanced MSP that is as per the Swaminathan Commission report, having an MSP that really supports the farmers and adding a law into these, adding another bill into these, in addition to these farm bills, which says that MSP should be at this level, for every different, each and every crop, which the government declares as the amount below which the corporates cannot go. That's the only way the farmers will be able to get real benefits from these farm bills.
Right. And Sharmila Tyagi is asking, why are we seeing protests only limited to a few states? You want to continue with that? I'll ask the next question to Kota then.
Yeah, I think actually, if you see, currently the protests are mainly focused on Punjab and Haryana because that is where a majority of the farmers bring their crop to the APMCs, But about 6 to 9% farmers actually sell their crops at the APMC. A lot of the others just sell them at the gate of their farms to the, whoever is the person who comes there, the middleman the trader who takes it from them. And farmers actually sell their produce for the next 2 or 3 years to these agents. Now, the protests are happening in Punjab and Haryana more because they are the ones who are majorly affected by these farm bills. But that does not mean the others are not affected, because there have been protests in Chennai, there have been protests in other states as well, in West Bengal, which have not been really put up, not been seen in the mainstream media. Mainly they have seen the Punjab and Haryana, probably also because that has some political traction with what happened when, the Akalis walked out of the NDA recently.
Correct.
So, but
so again, even the protests we cover, we select the protests, which protests are worthy of coverage and which perhaps are not. Kota, are you still there? I hope. Vidya Verma wants to know, one of the goals of the new farm bills was to introduce new private markets outside the APMC zones. Do you think that the government would be able to make sure that the relationship between private stakeholders and small farmers stays balanced, and indeed that big corporates will want to reach out to smaller agricultural producers at all?
Yeah, but just one issue here, right?
Yeah.
We see, in this country, the entire focus is always from the rural to the urban. The idea of modernity, the idea of development has always been how to, convert the villages into cities.
Correct.
The idea is how to urbanize the farmer who is in a dhoti, in a khaki, how to make him a modern person. That's the whole problem, right? We do not think that they are in a regular, respectable and a profitable venture. There is an assumption that this is bound to fail. The villages are waiting to collapse, and we have to rescue them with corporates, with markets, with help of capital, right? That's essentially what is the problem with this particular planning. How are you going to ensure that the farmer is going to get the right price? Because the APMC is the only point where price discovery used to happen. At the price at which a farmer was selling was known only at these mandis. Now, when they are selling to a private entity outside the APMC, how are we going to even discover at what price the farmers are going to do? And now this is the interesting thing. Look at the time period of redressal. The farmer gets 1 week to redress his problems. The corporates get 3 weeks or more, I think, they month or so. Now, there is already discrepancy in the initial stage. So, how are we going to ever get justice? I have no hope.
Correct. So obviously this farm bills are a hot topic for this discussion, at least because I have two more questions. I'm going to club them together because I think we barely have 3 minutes left. Namita, Satyam Mishra is asking, what can the government do to alleviate the concerns of farmers right now, assuming that they will not take a U-turn on the latest 3 bills? And Kamya Virmani is asking a related question to the farm bills, which is that the union government has been speaking in different voices, but claims to have implemented the recommendations made by the Swaminathan Commission. What are your thoughts on this? Namita, can you weigh in on both these questions?
Yeah, I think the one thing that the government can do, because even the Prime Minister has been saying that MSP will be there, MSP is not going to be non-existent. I said sometime earlier in the show that why not pass another bill, and this is recommended by P. Sainath, who has been talking extensively on the farm bills. Why not make another bill and put it up in Parliament that says that MSP will be supported and MSP will be a condition beyond, and the amount below which the corporates cannot, buy the produce. And the what was the second question? Sorry.
The second question, let me just scroll up, was by Kamya Verma, asking that the union government has been speaking in different voices.
Right.
But claims to have implemented.
They have been speaking in different voices. If you read the fine print of all those proclamations by the government, because at first, before they came into power, before 2014, they were talking about implementing the Swaminathan Commission report. And then they put an affidavit in the court saying that we cannot implement it, it's impossible. Then Arun Jaitley said that we have already implemented MSP, and he was talking about a different MSP than what was in the Swaminathan report. And then finally they said that, I think the MP government said that we have implemented MSP. So, there are different voices which come in, and this is the reason why the Prime Minister's proclamation that MSP will be there, the verbal commitment is not acceptable. It has to be put on into a bill, and the contracts of farmers and corporates also have to be made compulsory. There has to be a redressal system which is looking at the interests of the farmers. I mean, in this given time, this is all I can say.
All right. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to meet you, whether I'm meeting you virtually on a screen or whether we're in Jaipur. And as I said when we started, inshallah, we will be back in Jaipur very, very shortly, very soon. These times will be behind us. Sanjoy, William, and Namita Gokhale, thank you so much for organizing this. I'm thrilled that we are actually the first session kicking off season 2. I think that says a lot about the priorities of the GLM.
That's wonderful to know.
Yeah. I didn't know that we're the first session of season 2. I said, wow, that's something. Thank you, Kota. Thank you, Namita Waikar. Your insights are always, I always learn so much after I talk to you. Good
Thank
night to all of you watching. Good night and thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Namita.
much, Namita Bhandare, Kota Neelima, Namita Waikar. You're absolutely right. There's so much of distraction today on the airwaves that outside of the horror stories that happen in rural India, we hear nothing. And as both Kota Neelima and Namita Waikar said, there are also the good stories. They're stories which you can take as an example. They're heartening stories. They're stories of success. And we don't get to hear any of that. The obsession with what we've seen in recent times, uh, unfortunately, to the distraction of everything else of any importance, is a huge problem. And I do believe that, and I think we all believe that it's absolutely vital in today's day and age to be able to get the voice of those people out there who don't have that access. So once again, Kota Nilima, Namita Waikar, Namita Bhandari, thank you, all
you.
three of you, for being part of this conversation. Thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. And we'll log back on at 8:30 p.m. for our next session on JLF's Brave New World. The Silence of Sherzadeh, Defne Suman in conversation with Mansi Subramaniam, Turkish novelist Defne Suman's magical novel, Silence of Sherzadeh, tells the intertwining stories of a Levantine, a Greek, a Turkish, and an Armenian family in the turbulent years 1905 to 1922.
Fascinating.
Meanwhile, on the other end of the world, over the past 5 years, India by the Bay, Hong Kong, has established itself as one of the landmark cultural festivals in that city on the strength of its rich and diverse programming, which fuses the classical and contemporary across art, music, theater, dance, food, literature, film, and wellness. India by the Bay returns from 15th to 18th of October with an online series. Begins with wellness, yoga with Daniel Simpson, Zaika, food creativity and lockdown, Chef Romy Gill and Chef Piku in conversation. Music, East West, a legacy, Shubhendra Rao and Saskia in collaboration with Tiju Maishoing. And literature, Churchill hero or anti-hero, Shashi Tharoor in conversation with Mukulika Banerjee. And in case that's not enough of a fill, please remember we have a rebroadcast of I Believe Art Matters on the 18th of October. Given the large scale need for financial assistance in the cultural sector, Teamwork Fine Arts Society is curating a multi arts charity event, I Believe Art Matters. The initiative raises financial resources and support for artists and artisans to celebrate their craft and tradition by bringing their stories to the forefront. And this is, remember, it's on the 18th. It's hosted by Shabana Azmi and Manoj Bajpai. It's a marathon which runs for 6 hours, 36 minutes, featuring over 400 artists, including everybody from A.R. Rahman, Salim Suleiman, Shekhar Rabjiani, and the Shillong Chamber Choir, Ankur Tiwari, Shabnam Birmani, Kailash Kher, Viku Vinayak, Saskia, the inevitable Dr. L. Subramaniam. We have Nrityagram Dance Company, Aditi Mangaldas, Manjari Chaturvedi, Ashley Robo. We've got a wonderful slew of theatre, everything from Pia Bhairupia by Atul Kumar, to Shikhandi by Fazia Jalali, to Elephant in the Room by Yuki Elias, and of course, lots of comedy. Papa CJ, Abish Matthew, Radhika Vaz, and Varun Grover. So stay tuned for that and see you at 8:30.
Thank you.